And we are back with part 5 already of this week's reading of the Messianic Jewish Family Bible, Tree of Life version, TLV. And we're moving along and we're talking about the biblical feasts. And I'm going to recap on them as well because these feasts we're going to actually be talking about the fall festivals now, then eternal light and bread. And in chapter 25, we discuss the Jubilee years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it up to the end of 25, and then I'm going to recap all the feasts, all the commanded times, the Moedim of God, which are 7 of them. But we're gonna go through these chapters first. Adonai spoke to, okay, this is continuing with chapter 23. We're at fall festivals. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Benaiah Israel, saying, In the 7th month, and the first day of the month, you are to have a Shabbat rest, a memorial of blowing shofar, a holy convocation. You are to do no regular work, and you are to present an offering made by fire to Adonai. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, However, the 10th day of this 7th month is Yom Kippur, a holy convocation to you. So you are to afflict yourself. You are to bring an offering made by fire to Adonai. You are not to do any kind of work on that set day, for it is Yom Kippur, to make atonement for you before Adonai your God. For anyone who does not deny himself on that day must be cut off from his people. Anyone who does any kind of work on that day, that person I will destroy from among his people. You should do no kind of work. It is a statute forever throughout your generations. In all your dwellings, it is to be a Shabbat of solemn rest for you, and you are to humble your souls. On the 9th day of the month, in the evening, from evening until evening, you are to keep your Shabbat. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Benaiah Israel, and say, On the 15th day of this 7th month is the feast of Sukkot. For 7 days to Adonai it is Sukkot. And we talked about Sukkot. I did a lot of postings on Sukkot this past fall season. On the first day, there is to be a holy convocation. You are to do no laborious work. For 7 days, you are to bring an offering by fire to Adonai. The 8th day will be a holy convocation to you, and you are to bring an offering by fire to Adonai. It is a solemn assembly. You should do no laborious work. These are the Moedim of Adonai, which you are to proclaim to be holy convocations, to present an offering by fire to Adonai, a burnt offering, a grain offering, a sacrifice, a drink offering, each on its own day, besides those of the Shabbatot of Adonai, and besides your gifts. All your vows and all your freewill offerings will you give to Adonai. So on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruits of the land, you are to keep the feast of Adonai for 7 days. The first day is to be a Shabbat rest, and the 8th day will also be a Shabbat rest. On the first day you are to take choice fruit of trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and rejoice before Adonai your God for 7 days. You are to celebrate it as a festival to Adonai for 7 days in a year. It is a statute forever throughout your generations. You are to celebrate it in the 7th month. You are to live in Sukkot for 7 days. All the native born in Israel are to live in Sukkot, so that your generations may know that I had Benaiah Israel to dwell in Sukkot when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Adonai your God. So Moses declared to Benaiah Israel the Moedim of Adonai. And that's the end of chapter 23. Like I said, I will recap these feasts. Eternal light and bread is chapter 24. Before I do that, I just want to double check. There's a passage in the footnotes, Acts chapter 2, Verse 1, when the day of Shavuot had come, they were all together in one place. Suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the whole house while they were sitting, and tongues like fire spreading out appeared to them and settled on each one of them. They were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh and began to speak in other tongues as the Ruach enabled them to speak out. The Holy Spirit descended on them, in other words, on the day of Pentecost. And of course, there are places that these modim also appear in the New Testament. We talk about the Feast of Tabernacles, when we're going to tabernacle with the Lord forever in Jerusalem, or all the nations must come to Jerusalem to worship the King. That is tabernacles. And like I said, I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to recap that in a little bit. In chapter 24, we're going to be talking about the oil and the showbread are discussed in this chapter. The lamps were to be upon pure candlesticks before the Lord continuously. The showbread was to be 12 cakes set in 2 rows. Frankincense was to be put in each row. Every Sabbath it was to be set in order. And the second part of 24 is going to discuss death for blasphemy of the name of the Lord. It also discusses a son of an Israelite woman whose father was Egyptian. He blasphemed the Lord and was cursed. He was brought before Moses, and the mother, Shelemith, was the daughter of Dibri, was from the tribe of Dan, and the man ended up being stoned. Blaspheming the Lord and murder and cursing was met with stoning. So we're going to read about that. And then, of course, like I said, in chapter 25, the Sabbath and Jubilee years were addressed in this chapter. And the seventh year is a Sabbath year, and it is a year for the land to rest. 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years, is 49 years, would then become a Jubilee year in the 50th year. On the 10th day of the 7th month, in the day of atonement, the trumpet is to be sounded through the land. The 50th year, liberty is proclaimed throughout the land, and it is a Jubilee year. So we're going to read about that. So we're going to go on and read through chapters 24 and 25, and then I'm going to recap on these feasts. The Moedim, the appointed times of God, the 7 commanded feasts. Chapter 24, Eternal Light and Bread. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Order Bnei Israel to bring to you pure olive oil beaten for the light, to keep a lamp burning continually, outside of the curtain of the testimony in the tent of meeting. Aaron is to keep it in order from evening to morning before Adonai continually. It is to be a statute forever throughout your generations. He is to keep the lamps in order on the pure gold menorah before Adonai continually. Also you are to take fine flour and bake 12 cakes of it with 2/10 of an ephah in each cake. Then you are to set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the pure gold table before Adonai. Set pure frankincense on each row as a memorial portion for the bread and an offering by fire to Adonai. Every Yom Shabbat, he is to set it in order before Adonai continually in an everlasting covenant on behalf of Bnei Israel. It belongs to Aaron and his sons, and they are to eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy to him among the offerings of Adonai by fire as a perpetual statute. Justice and restitution is the second part of chapter 24. Now the son of an Israelite woman whose father was an Egyptian went out among Bnei Israel, and a fight broke out between the Israelite woman's son and an Israelite man. The Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name and cursed, so they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelemith, the daughter of Dibri, of the tribe of Dan. They put him in custody until the will of Adonai could be declared to them. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Bring the one who cursed out of the camp, and let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and have the entire congregation stone him. And you will speak to Bani Israel, saying, Whoever curses his God will bear his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of Adonai must surely be put to death. The whole congregation must stone him. The outsider as well as the native born, when he blasphemes the name, is to be put to death. Whoever mortally strikes down any man must surely be put to death. Whoever mortally strikes down an animal is to make restitution, life for life. If anyone injures his neighbor as he has done, the same is to be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Just as he injured someone, so it should be done to him. Whoever kills an animal is to make restitution, but the one who kills a man is to be put to death. You are to have one standard of justice for the outsider as well as the native born, for I am Adonai your God. So Moses spoke to Bani Israel, and they led the one who had cursed out of the camp, then stoned him with rocks. Then Bani Israel did as Adonai commanded Moses. Parashat Behar, Behr, Shabbat, Year, and Jubilee. This is chapter 25. Then Adonai said to Moses on Mount Sinai, Speak to Bani Israel and tell them, When you come into the land which I give you, then the land is to keep a Shabbat to Adonai. For 6 years you may sow your field, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in its fruits. But in the seventh year there is to be a Shabbat rest for the land, a Shabbat to Adonai. You are not to sow your field or prune your vineyard. You are not to reap what grows by itself during your harvest, nor gather the grapes of your unintended vine. It is to be a year of Shabbat rest for the land. Whatever the Shabbat of the land produces will be food for yourself, for your servant, for your maidservant, for your hired worker, and for the outsider dwelling among you, even for your livestock and for the animals that are in your land. All its increase will be enough food. You are to count off 7 Shabbatot of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the time is 7 Shabbatot of years, 49 years. Then on the 10th day of the 7th month of Yom Kippur, you are to sound a shofar blast. You are to sound the shofar all throughout your land. You are to make the 50th year holy and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It is to be a jubilee to you, when each of you is to return to his own property, and each of you is to return to his family. That 50th year will be your jubilee. You are not to sow or reap that which grows by itself, or gather from the unintended vines. Since it is a jubilee, it is to be holy to you. You will eat from its increase out of the field. In the year of jubilee, each of you will return to his property. If you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you are not to wrong one another. Corresponding to the number of years after the Jubilee, you are to purchase land from your neighbor's hand, and he is to sell it to you based on the number of years of crops. In proportion to the extent of years, you may increase its price or decrease its price in proportion to the fewness of years, because he is selling a number of harvests to you. You are not to cheat one another, but fear your God, for I am Adonai your God. Therefore you are to keep my statutes and observe my ordinances and carry them out, so that you may live securely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you may eat your fill and live there in safety. Now if you ask, What are we to eat during the seventh year, if we see we are not to sow nor gather and increase? Now I will command my blessing to you in the 6th year, so that it will yield a harvest sufficient for 3 years. When you sow during the 8th year, you will still be eating the old stored harvest until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. Comes in. Moreover, the land is not to be sold permanently, because the land is mine. For you are sojourners with me. For any land you possess, you are to provide for redemption of the land. If your brother becomes poor and sells some of his property, then his nearest kinsman may come and redeem what his brother has sold. If a man has no kinsman redeemer, but he himself recovers and finds sufficient means to redeem it, then let him reckon the years since its sale and restore the surplus to the man to whom he sold it. Then he will return to his property, But if he is not able to get it back for himself, then what he has sold is to remain in the hand of the one who has bought it until the year of Jubilee. Then in the Jubilee it should be released, so he may return to his property. If a man sells a house in a walled city, then he may redeem it within a whole year after it has been sold. For a full year he has the right of redemption. But if it is not redeemed within the space of a full year, then the house that is in the walled city will belong permanently to the one who has bought it throughout his generations. It will not be released in the Jubilee. But the houses of the villages that have no wall around them are to be considered as open country. They have redemption rights and are to be released in the Jubilee. But as for the towns of the Levites, the Levites may have a permanent right of redemption for the houses in the towns of their possession. The Levites may redeem a house sold in the town of its possession. Also, it should be released in the Jubilee for the houses of the bleh, for the houses of the Levitical towns are their possessions among Bnei Israel, but the fields and the pasture lands of their cities may not be sold, for it is their permanent possession. Now I am going to pause this here and come back and finish chapter 25.